All right, Nuggets fans, welcome in to Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at BETONLINE. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I am excited to be here. We'll discuss a little bit of the Nuggets-Nets game that happened. We'll go around the NBA just a little bit, but wanted to go over mostly Denver Nuggets overreactions to start the season, whether they're from Nuggets fans, whether they're from NBA fans, whether they're from just random folks off the street. There's a lot of takes on the Denver Nuggets so far this year, and we're going to go over all of them and discuss what the heck is real, what is not real, and all of the stuff in between that has yet to come to pass. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Would really, really appreciate it. Obviously, we've been going over this new schedule for Pickaxe and Roll. I hope it is a good one for people to catch in the mornings. 8 or 9 is a little bit too early for me, so I go at 10 a.m. on Mountain Times, especially because usually I'm up pretty late the night before doing some other things, including writing. You can make sure to catch over all of my writing over at milehighsports.com. There are some good things over there, and there will continue to be good things over there throughout the season. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. This podcast, really quickly, is brought to you by the good folks over at BetOnline. Basketball fans, it's that time of year again. The NBA is back from opening tip-off to buzzer beaters. BetOnline has you covered with the biggest odds, best promotions, and live in-game betting on all of your favorite teams, especially the Denver Nuggets. This season, every game matters. BetOnline has every stat, matchup breakdown, and even live odds to bet on during the game. They have other props as well, whether they're football, playoffs, although not MLB playoffs anymore, and then the NHL, and even political props. Head on over to the website to get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right. Let's go over this first and foremost. Actually, we got a super chat from Cedric. Let's start off with this bad boy. People said Russ was the worst player and to cut him. This is actually on the list of one of the things that I was going to discuss. We'll kick it off with this one. Russell Westbrook did not have a good first 3 games for the Denver Nuggets, but he was actually okay in the third one. I wouldn't describe it as bad. First 2 at home wasn't the best impression, but his defense was still pretty solid. And then in the fourth game, he effectively won the game for Denver, or at least turned the tide with that second unit, and had some crazy plays. Not loved, but the pull-up 3 that he hit was crazy. He hit a 3 right at the end of the quarter, which I'm not surprised. You don't necessarily want to drive into the teeth of the defense on that one. Everybody and their mother expected Russ to drive into the defense. And so he just pulls up for 3, wide open shot, hits it. And then in transition, 19 on the clock, he hits another one in the fourth quarter. Look, those probably aren't going down in the future, but it was still a really good moment. And one of those that you bring in Russell Westbrook for on the second night of a back-to-back to be better. So thank you for Cedric for the super chat. Good comment. Good start. Before we get into the rest of the overreactions, I want to talk a little bit about, Denver won their OT game against Brooklyn. It was in overtime. Brooklyn, I think, is a little bit better than people expected. I thought I had them penciled in for 17 wins this year, but just the way that they play and the style that they play, if a team gets a little bit lax with them, they can win. They can absolutely win. Cam Thomas is a flamethrower. Dennis Schroeder's too good to just kind of leave alone. And then Cam Johnson, he's a great shooter. They've got some good shooters on that team, and they've got some good players. So they will steal some games from other teams, especially early in the season while they're still trying and other teams are maybe they're tired after what happened with the Nuggets, what Denver was on the second night of a back-to-back. So I think it's understandable that it happened. So interesting to see, interesting to figure out. October 30th, somebody say that Brooklyn won last night? Yes, they did. They beat Memphis on the road last night. Dennis Schroeder was great. Cam Johnson was great. Cam Thomas, not great, but he still got to the free throw line 11 times. They've got enough shooters, man, that they're not bad. And then Memphis, like, they should absolutely win that game, but they were unable to do so. Now, Marcus Smart only played 6 minutes. Desmond Bane played 17. But still, like, if you're Memphis, you should be able to win that one. When you're down a couple players, makes some sense. So Denver, that win against Brooklyn, by the end of the season, Brooklyn's not going to look that good. They'll probably win like 20 to 25 games. I'm not going to overreact to it. But remember last year when Denver lost to Houston for like 3 straight times in the month of November, basically? That's effectively what I'm talking about here. When rebuilding teams are early in the season, they don't necessarily know or believe that they are rebuilding. They're going to do what they can to win all these games. Everybody's going to try. Nobody's jaded yet. This was the 4th game of the season. Anything can happen in the 4th game of the season. So I'm not surprised that Denver won it. I think it's good that they won it. I'm also not surprised that they struggled, kind of like with Toronto the night before. Also, just the second night of a back-to-back. Denver's second night of a back-to-back. Matt Moore shared a stat with me. I don't know if he's put this out publicly, but teams that win in overtime and then have to go and travel on the second night of a back-to-back on the road over the last, I think, 10 years were 8-27 straight up. 8-27. So, like, it doesn't really happen that often that a team wins. So it was a good win for Denver. No matter what anybody wants to say, I don't care. I don't care about that at all. Jokic was tremendous again, obviously. Jamal Murray was okay. There are some decisions that I have that I could definitely quibble with for him. Michael Porter got his shot to go. That was a good sign. 4 of 7 from 3. Although his defense, like, I've tried to give him some compliments on the defensive end and some of the things that he's been doing. He still gets lost so often. And I think that there are some concerns and some questions on, like, hey, can Denver survive with how big they are if they're not going to be entirely locked in? So it does make sense to me that Denver needed some other guys to step up too. Aaron Gordon, 24 points on a very efficient 8 of 11 shooting, I believe, and 7 of 7 from the free throw line. That was tremendous. And then, of course, you get the Russell Westbrook game where he gets the 2 pull-up threes, 10 of 10 from the free throw line. That is about all you can ask for from Russell Westbrook. He's not a good shooter. And like there have been some talks about him changing the shooting form, and maybe that's helping. Maybe there's something good that he's really doing with that. But we're going to see over the length of a season how this is going to go. But like I said at the top, this is exactly what you bring in Russell Westbrook to do. Second night of a back-to-back, you need some energy. Starters are lagging a little bit on one end or the other, and you just need somebody to get you out of it. So it's going to be interesting. Going to be interesting to see. True Teller says, Jamal Murray needs to stop shooting contested mid-range shots when he has Joker open. Look, I understand everybody saying this, and the one play that you're talking about, I understand. I get it. Because I was like, hey, in that situation, Jamal just dribbling the air out of the ball, and then like with the clock winding down in the late 4th quarter, and then Joker gets a switch, Jamal's got to be able to pass that one. And yet, I'm not really concerned about Jamal from that perspective, because he did pass a fair amount. And you also, like, I would be inconsistent with you guys if I said that I wanted Jamal taking more shots than 14 a game. And then when he takes 19 shots a game, trying to take as much pressure off of Joker as possible, that would be bad. Joker can't do, he can do everything, but if you continue to feed him over and over and over again, he's going to break down. He's going to wear down. So there have to be times where Jamal takes that shot. Maybe it's not that one, and I understand that. Maybe it's not that shot, but there are going to be times where you're like, kind of think that Jamal should have passed there. Here's the thing. If you go down that line of thinking, every time he gets a switch, you're going to be like, Jamal should pass every time. Every single time. And that's just not true. That's not how this works. So It's a ongoing discussion. Jamal and Joker are playing more together this year than they have before, and I think that you're going to see that balance kind of like ebb and flow. That was a bad decision by Jamal, in my opinion, but it does not necessarily make the next time he shoots when Jamal has a switch and Joker has a switch, it does not make that one a bad decision. So just keep that in mind. This is going to be an ongoing discussion here. It just kind of depends on the actual like matchup and situation and things like that, and how and whether Jamal has it going or not. And he didn't really have it going, so I was kind of surprised that he did it, and I didn't think it was a good decision then. So just keep it in mind. You have to keep an open mind on these things. I know. Plus says you can rewind the play and look at Jokic. Even he was frustrated with Murray, and he almost never is. Yeah, it was a bad decision. I'm not going to sit here and defend it. I commented on it on Twitter, but I also know why it's happening. And I think everybody, rather than jumping down Jamal's throat every time it happens, like you got to understand that if you want him to be like to grow and take some of these, that's fine. Like it's understandable. All right. Let's take a break. When we come back, and okay, good win against Brooklyn. Denver's 2-2. They've got a really tough matchup coming up, but there's a lot of these leftover takes from where a lot of other teams are, a lot of other fan bases are just rubbing their hands. They're like, love the downfall for the Nuggets. They will never, ever be what they were. We're going to talk about whether that's true or not on the other side. We will be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we're back. Pickaxe and Roll, Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Would really appreciate it. All right, let's do some overreactions. I asked on Twitter about an hour ago, what are some of the biggest overreactions to the Denver Nuggets first week of the season? Whether it is fan overreactions, whether it's other fan bases, whether it's the national media trying to have their takes on the situation. It feels like a lot of folks are just writing off the Nuggets. Like that's the general vibe. Even some fans are writing off the Nuggets. And I understand. It didn't look very good to start this season, but there have also been seasons from the Nuggets where they look a lot worse, or they don't necessarily look very good. I think there have been starts to the years in Nuggets past where the Nuggets have looked better than they have right now, and they are they're 1-3 or 1-4 or 2-3 or somewhere around there to start the season. And then there are times where okay, be patient, understand what's actually happening here. This isn't necessarily one of those times. I think that there's some merit to some of the overreactions that are happening, but I also want to go over them and give you my thoughts. So let's do it. I asked on Twitter for a bunch of Nuggets overreactions, and I had some great responses from folks. Robert says, panicking about any aspect of their title hopes with a new starter and a bench of new/young guys that needs time to gel. Perfectly reasonable start here. The Nuggets, I think, are going to be just one of those teams that you need to have some time with. We've talked about why this start of the season would be a little bit rough, and why, hey, preseason they went 1-4. Peyton Watson didn't get any time to play with the team. I said during the offseason that maybe he should be the sixth man. Maybe he should play the most amount of time off the bench. And so far, it hasn't looked like he should be anywhere close to that. So there are reasons to kind of wait and understand that the panic should not be setting in yet. But I also understand why people are panicking, because this does not look like a title contender. There are other teams, namely Boston, who, the comeback from Boston last night was insane. I'm not sure if it says more about them or Indiana, but actually, no, Indiana did win that game in the end, didn't they? Yeah, that was Indiana did win that game in the end, but the fact that it got to where it did, like, it says a lot about Boston and their firepower. And then OKC, who has been just unbelievable to start this season. They look incredible. Nobody can score on OKC. It shouldn't necessarily be a Nuggets overreaction, by the way. That should be an OKC take, is that nobody can score on OKC, including the Denver Nuggets so far. So yeah, young guys, new players, needs time to gel. Jeff Morton, the trade Mike stuff has been crazy. Yeah, I mean, it has been crazy. And Sebastian also says everyone deciding that MPJ needs to be traded. It has clearly been a trade Mike season kind of start. And that's what happens when Mike doesn't shoot. And he's a shooter. Like, you want Michael Porter Jr. to be taking shots and making shots. And he's been getting a lot of open jumpers. And he finally got some of them to go in this last game, 4 of 7 from 3. I think if you're the Nuggets, you want them to get even more shots up if possible. Try to get to that 5 of 8, 4 of 8 number on a consistent basis if you can. And there will be times where he takes 10 threes or 11 threes or 13 threes if you can possibly manage it. But in order to justify it, he's got to make them. So I think Mike's defense is really, like, after the first game when I thought it was pretty good, overall, I think that there have been some stuff where, like, this is just the natural reaction to the money, where you're not trading Christian Brown because he's on a rookie contract. You're not trading Jokic. Murray and Gordon just got their extensions, so they can't be traded. So you naturally look to Mike from a salary standpoint. So I understand why people are doing this. And in the end, it might actually happen. But I also know that this is an overreaction to break up the starting lineup. And the starting lineup, by the way, plus 11.8 net rating in 100 plus minutes. Basically the same as last year. Basically the same. So kind of interesting to look at it from that perspective. East Coast Nuggets says the gotcha from rival fans who once had Russell Westbrook on their teams. This has been one that I've been paying attention to for sure. Kind of wild, right? Kind of wild to see all of the fan bases that previously had Russell Westbrook, especially the LA teams, bandy together, combine their forces, and drop into Nuggets fans' mentions, Nuggets writers' mentions, my mentions, and be like, yeah, we told you, Russell Westbrook sucks. We told you, guys. Okay, I mean, here's the thing. Nuggets fans didn't have this massively high expectations for what Russell Westbrook was going to be. Denver had to watch Reggie Jackson last year be their sixth man. Reggie Jackson played a lot of minutes. And if you look at the numbers, Russell Westbrook and Reggie Jackson are effectively doing exactly the same thing through 4 games. And Russ is actually rebounding the ball better. So I'm not surprised that every fan base is like, yeah, gotcha. We went through the Russ experience and it sucks for you. It's not actually that. It's really not. Like, honestly, Russ has been really good defensively. He's actually had a lot of great moments on that end of the floor. And how many great moments can you remember for Reggie Jackson defensively? It just hasn't really happened. So there is so much that I disagree with on those fan base, like, from their part. If they think that Russ is replacing KCP, then sure, maybe they have a point. But Russ is not replacing KCP. He's replacing Reggie Jackson, and Christian Brown has effectively replaced KCP. So there are reasons to think that Denver, like, if their main guys get going, that Denver actually upgraded at those 2 positions. I think there's actually an argument for that. We'll see what actually happens with it, but the gotcha, you're right. That is a massive overreaction from everybody. And I'm glad that Russ had this good game on Tuesday night. We will see what happens against a championship contender in Minnesota, against Rudy Gobert, against the perimeter defense that Minnesota has. I am curious how that's going to work and what those matchups are going to look like. We'll find out. NBA bandwagon fan says, it's Jover. It's Jover. Can't win a championship. Can't win a title anymore with this Nuggets group. As long as Denver has Nikola Jokic, they have a chance. Jamal Murray's got to get back on track overall, and he will. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. Michael Porter, he's going to shoot 40% from three this year, Michael Porter is. If he doesn't, then I will be very surprised. Or like we'll round down to like 39%. If he shoots 39% or better, that makes sense to me. If he doesn't shoot that, then I'll be kind of surprised. But anybody that's saying it's Jover for the Nuggets through the first four games, other teams have struggled through the first four games of their championship runs. So not necessarily worried about it from that perspective to start the year. And also, like, there's still time for Denver to add to their rotation, to change some of the rotations that they do, and to play a little better. Like, guys just have to play better. So I'm curious to see what happens with it, but I'm not subscribing to the it's Jover sentiment from especially other fan bases. Jokic Joestar, shout out to State of the League. There were none. There were no overreactions to what the Nuggets have done so far. That's an interesting take because lots of folks have shared crazy takes so far. Lots of folks have shared a lot of stuff about how Jokic is being wasted. Murray isn't good anymore. Russell Westbrook needs to retire, things like that. The Nuggets window is closed. Maybe they're right. I don't think that they are. And so I think that he's wrong here, but maybe they're right. And I think that anybody that's simply saying that none of the overreactions are right is probably wrong. I think that some of these will eventually come true. Some of these will eventually come to pass. Most of them, it's too early. But often what I find in these situations is that the instincts of fans in those reactions, they tend to be proven correct initially or like over a long period of time. So we'll see. We'll see what ultimately becomes of it. But this is kind of the other side of the coin where, hey, maybe some folks were right. And we'll just have to figure out which one of the fan base, like one of these are actually correct. And I've still got plenty more to go through. Paul says that losing KCP is the problem. Definitely not the problem. I do think that the way that the Nuggets are being guarded in their starting unit is different because KCP is not out there. His defender is not necessarily leaving KCP as often in those situations. Christian Brown, his defenders very much more willing to help in the middle of the lane on different actions, but it is allowing Christian Brown to cut. It's allowing him some good opportunities for threes. And Christian's shooting like, 36, 37% from three so far? It's very low volume, so he's going to have to get up a little bit more volume in general. But that's a problem for November, then December, then January, just trying to figure things out. So far, I think that Christian Brown has been just fine, especially with the slashing. He's been really good, and especially with the defense. I think Christian Brown's defense has proven to be essential for the Nuggets starters. And to that end, KCP, like there are some matchups that he would have gotten cooked in some of these situations. And I think that Christian has done a really good job, at least initially, of sticking with his man. Last one before we take a break here. An actual NBA scout. This is from Beastbrook, who's a fledgling Russell Westbrook stan who came over with Russ. He says an actual NBA scout said Russ needs to retire and can't play anymore. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Russ is in his 17th season, so I understand where the scout is coming from. It's been a long time for Russ. Like he has played for a long, long time, and there are things that he is like still struggling with or will continue to struggle with for the rest of his career. But if he can actually like shoot a higher percentage on free throws, if he can actually hit some standstill threes a little bit more consistently this year, there's going to be enough for him to make it work. I got to imagine that this report came out before the last game. I think that the last game was probably more fluky than it was anything else. But I do think in general that if Russ can mix in some of those explosive drives to the rim, where he's a little bit out of control, but can still get to the ring and shoot over people and do those things. If he can mix in that with just slowing down, understanding the scheme, and trying to free up other guys for shots for themselves, he will be just fine. And some of the passes that he's made so far this year have been pretty good. Some of the passes have been pretty bad, but overall, like I think the assist to turnover ratio for him is about 3. It's been pretty good. Like hard to account for anything higher than that. So pretty good stuff overall from Russ, despite the fact that I think that there are some fair criticisms that will eventually come down and we'll have to wait and see. But Russ can play. Russ can still play. There's no question about that in my mind. The question is whether he will continue to be helpful, and we'll just have to find out. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to chat about other Nuggets overreactions. I've got some ones that I've got stocked in the pipeline. So we'll do that, and then we'll go around the NBA here on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we're back. Final segment, Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Would really appreciate it. Let's get back to these overreactions for the Nuggets and get straight into it. Blaine says that the Nuggets are cooked for the season in October. Obviously, anybody that says that is just a hater. There are certain teams that I think could be cooked, like the Milwaukee Bucks. Milwaukee looks pretty bad. I'm not gonna lie. They do not look tremendous here. And anybody that's been paying attention to Milwaukee a little bit, they've been pretty shaky. I'm very curious to see what happens with them in terms of like teams and what's actually happening with them. At least Jamal stays on the floor, man. Chris Middleton is not staying on the floor. Brook Lopez looks a little bit shaky to start the year for Milwaukee, and then their depth has been pretty meh. At least with the Nuggets, you've seen some of these breakouts. Christian Brown has really stepped up into that role. Gary Trent Jr. is feeling the same thing for Milwaukee, and it just hasn't been as good. So I'm curious to see which of those teams, because I think there's a lot of similarities, obviously, between the Nuggets and the Milwaukee Bucks. Which of those teams is going to kind of break out of their slump a little bit first? Is it going to be the Nuggets? Is it going to be the Bucks? Which team is going to sort of turn around their core four that they've had for a little bit, or at least the last couple of years? And which of those teams is going to maybe have to break some things up? We will see what happens. Jason says, panicking over the bench. It's a bunch of young players and vets who've never played with each other going to take time to gel. I feel like, Robert basically had the same thing here. Very close to it. So, yeah, I firmly agree, Jason. Panicking over the bench early is, a lot of people have made the distinct assertion that the Nuggets bench sucks. And in terms of the rest of the NBA, they might be onto something. But I also know that Denver doesn't need that much from their bench. They just need the bare minimum for the most part. And as long as Denver can continue to get some scoring outbursts here and there, and the Nuggets bench doesn't hemorrhage points, we'll see what happens. But so far, the numbers that I've been looking at, the Jamal Joker lineups have been pretty good. Jamal without Joker has been subpar. It's been negative. Joker without Jamal has been negative. And then when both of them sit, that's what the Nuggets have really been getting into for their bench lineups most of the year. It's been really bad. So we'll have to keep that appraised, keep that updated, and see what happens. But the Dario Saric stuff, that is definitely, we're going to have to see what happens there. Jerry says virtually every reaction is an overreaction. And honestly, that's probably true. I've always, not always, but like you can make overreactions and they might end up being right, like especially in the first week of the season, as I mentioned. But most of the time you want to give it a little bit of time to like actually normalize a little bit. Because here's the thing. Denver's played 3 pretty strong perimeter defenses, and they've played a second night of a back-to-back, and that's been their 4 games. So I'm not surprised that, hey, little bit of toughness, a little bit of things that they got to figure out. So we'll see whether they can actually do it. But I think every reaction, it's a fair take that it's actually the opposite of what Jokic Star. Gosh, what he actually said, that there were no overreactions. This is every overreaction. Jake says that Jamal is cooked. This is classic Murray. The more he is doubted, the better he gets. This was a fascinating one, and it actually prompted me to do some digging, to do some research. So without further ado, here are the first 4 games of Jamal's career in every season. If you look at the graph that's on the screen, let me just go through the points totals for each of them. Rookie season, he had 0.5 points because he didn't make a shot in his first 4 games. 2017-18, his first year as a starter, 8.5 points per game. 2018-19, 13.8 points per game. 2019-20, 18.8 points per game. We're getting somewhere here. But the efficiency that year, 41.7 from the field, 31.8 from 3. Unsurprisingly, not as good as you probably want it to be. 2020-21, 21 points per game. This was after the bubble. 21 points per game on 44% from the field, 40% from 3. Pretty solid. 2022-23. So we're skipping a year, and then we're going after the ACL tear, and this is the ACL rehab. 12.3 points per game on 38% from the field in his first 4 games. Last year, surprisingly good. I think people forget about this. 20 points per game, 8.3 assists per game on 49% from the field, 50% from 3. That's a really good start to the season for Jamal. And then this year, he's back down to 18.8 points per game, 4.8 assists, 5 rebounds, down to 38% from the field and 35% from 3. Look, the 35% is what it is. You would want that to be better, but it is 4 games. The real one is the finishing and the finishing around the rim. 37.9 is just too low for somebody that's going to take as much shots as he's going to take. And part of that is playing OKC and then the Clippers, where he had to go up against, I think, who was guarding him most of the time? It wasn't Powell. It wasn't Harden. Was it Derrick Jones Jr.? Derrick Jones Jr. and Terrence Mann and Chris Dunn for much of that game. And then it was Davion Mitchell and Javon Shed in the Toronto game. Both of those guys are pretty good. And then he had a second out of a back-to-back. So I understand why he's been pretty inefficient to start the year. I'm looking forward to seeing whether he can break out, but you want to see him have a good game. I don't think we've seen him have a good game yet for the Nuggets. We've seen him be solid, seen him be okay, seen him be subpar, but I think Nuggets fans all would like to see Jamal Murray have a valuable and efficient shooting night, and we'll just wait and see when that happens. But obviously, just if looking at the chart, been pretty consistently subpar for the first 4 games of each season of his career. So, look, that's just how it's going to be. Nick says Jamal Murray being treated like Wolves' Andrew Wiggins. Yeah, neither of those guys made an all-star game, and Wolves' Andrew Wiggins then got traded to the Golden State Warriors and figured some stuff out as like a third option or fourth option for them. Does Jamal need to be a third option or fourth option? Maybe. Does he need less responsibility, and might that help him? That's possible. But I also think that in general, the Wolves, Andrew Wiggins, like that was kind of doomed from the start. And Wiggins is just not as good of a player, I think, as Jamal. He never really has been. He puts up a lot of empty points. Jamal, the problem is that his points, they aren't empty. He just doesn't get a lot of numbers in general. Like when he's playing next to Joker, he doesn't take a lot of shots. It's actually a problem that I think Nuggets fans have, is that he kind of stays a little bit more aloof and gets out of the way of Joker a whole bunch. And if Nuggets fans had their druthers, Joker would be averaging 35, 20, and 10, and Jamal would be averaging 10, 0, and 0, or 10, 0, and 10. My mistake. Let's see. Fan of Nugs says all the weak ass in-game tweets from local writers except Adam Morris. Interesting. So, among local writers, Adam said that he was going to have he was going to take the under on the Nuggets season, which is really funny because he also doesn't do a lot of in-game tweets because he's doing the live show for them and making sure that they're he's reacting to the game. So he doesn't have a lot of time for in-game tweets. Most of the time, the in-game tweets that are bad for the Nuggets are because the Nuggets have been bad. So that's generally my take. Am I more negative during the game? Yeah, I am, because what I'm watching is not a championship caliber approach. But I understand why people get annoyed with me. So is what it is. I won't be offended. If people don't like my in-game tweeting, then they can mute me. It's fine. Olaf says that they are still a championship team. That is an overreaction. Interesting. I think Olaf, when he continued this comment, he was like, they obviously overpaid for their two stars in Murray and MPJ, and that was part of his other narrative as well. That might be right, but we've seen teams overpay for players and then win a championship. So I'm not going to sit here and say that they're wrong. Didn't they win a championship with Michael Porter on the same contract? Isn't that a thing that happened? They could still do it. Cymatic says MPJ and Russ critique 20 games should really tell where they're at individually and as a team. I agree. At least 10. But this is what part of overreactions are. Everybody wants to have the sweeping take and understand that they are right. And it is pretty funny. It is pretty funny for sure to see how this is. But yeah, I would want to see, because Michael Porter, he's had bad 4-game stretches from shooting threes. He'll have a great 4-game stretch coming up. I have no doubt in my mind that he will be pretty good at some point during this. Nicole Aesthetic says, and shout out to Nicole Aesthetic for all the good work that he does pulling great clips. The championship window is closed, and from some big names too. Yeah, I've seen this a lot. Seen this a lot for sure. And it's not closed, obviously. It gets harder. It gets tougher. And I think the answers and the number of answers that the Nuggets have to get back to championship form are lesser than they were previously. And that's what happens when you commit money to Murray, to Gordon, to Porter, and all these guys, and then you let somebody like KCP walk. You just have fewer answers to different situations. What happens if Denver, maybe they would have wanted to play Christian Brown and KCP together and take Michael Porter off the floor? What if they wanted to take Aaron Gordon off the floor and play Christian Brown and KCP together? I think that there's some reason to believe that the Nuggets may have screwed up from that, and I think they would be a better team right now if they had KCP on their roster. Now, it would have been tough, and I probably at some point would have been lobbying for KCP to come off the bench, but you can't really take him off the bench and also pay him $20 million. So it's going to be interesting. Some of these things, they're always going to be very difficult for Denver to figure out. So I'm curious to see what happens with it, but championship window is obviously not closed. I don't know who's actually written off Denver entirely, but I'm sure that Bill Simmons has. He definitely had some critiques pretty early on, and I think that, who was it? Brian Windhorst also, he wrote something about it, and I think they talked about it on their show. So there's been a lot of chatter. There's been a lot of discussion. Whether it's true or not, we'll just have to see. And finally, Andrew says that Jay Huff was the answer. This is the funniest overreaction. Jay Huff's been great for Memphis. Shout out to Jay Huff. Good for him. He's had some really good games. What did he do in this last game against the Brooklyn Nets? Well, he had 10 minutes and 4 points, and he was a minus 12. So he was one of the reasons that they lost to Brooklyn. So It's funny. It's funny. I'm happy for Jay Huff, man. He got the contract and that was great, but he's also not an awesome player. And anybody that was saying that he was going to be the answer for Denver's backup center issues, sorry. All right. That's about it on overreactions. Let's look around the league really quick. Let's do a standings check really quick. NBA standings. I haven't pulled this up yet, so apologies for that. Let's go to ESPN. Gonna drag it over here onto my screen here. Cleveland 5-0. Boston lost last night 4-1, but they still look great. Chicago 3-2 to start the season. They have a negative point differential, but they're 3-2. Orlando's 3-2. New York is 2-2. Miami's 2-2. Washington, by the way, that's another one that if you're looking for a team to watch pretty early, Washington's not bad. Kyle Kuzma just got hurt, unfortunately for them, but Washington with Bilal Coulibaly, he looks great. He looks like a Mikal Bridges type right now. Just the way that he is playing, very young player overall, but the way that he's defended Trae Young over the course, they played 2 games in a row between Atlanta and Washington, and Washington won both. So my take initially about, hey, we'll see what happens with Atlanta this year. Yeah, they're 2-3 and they've lost 3 games in a row, and 2 of them have been to the Washington Wizards. So I was probably wrong about that one. Charlotte's 2-2. Indiana's 2-3. They looked like they started 1-3 on the year, and then I thought that they were going to lose that game to Boston last night. So glad that they won. They're a good team. Milwaukee is 1-3. Philly is 1-3. Both of those teams obviously struggling for a variety of different reasons. Milwaukee, they've lost 3 in a row, and they can't defend a chair. Philly, they don't have their main guy, but it sounds like Joel Embiid is going to come back, and Paul George should probably follow suit pretty soon. We'll see what happens with them. In the Western Conference, OKC is 4-0. Golden State is 4-1, despite the fact that they lost Steph Curry for a couple games. They just decided, yeah, we're going to go ahead and beat the New Orleans Pelicans twice in a row in the same situation that Washington and Atlanta were in. Pretty impressive from them to be able to beat a team like New Orleans. I know that New Orleans they've got their own injury issues for sure, but that should be a game that New Orleans at least splits, right? The fact that Golden State won both of those is wild. So I took the under on Golden State this year. I thought that with the Curry news that would be reasonable. As it turns out, Golden State might be a little bit better than I expected. Phoenix is 3-1, but it doesn't really look as good from them. Dallas is 3-1. They look really good. There have been some things that they've struggled with initially, but I think that Dallas is going to be better than Denver. Lakers are 3-2. I'm not surprised by that, though they have lost 2 in a row, and the last one that they lost was to Cleveland, and they got scorched. So going to be interesting to see there. Houston, Clippers, Kings, T-Wolves, Nuggets, all of those teams are 2-2. So Denver's win percentage or their win differential, their point differential isn't great from those first 4 games. It's actually the lowest of any of those teams. Denver will be fine. They just got to bank wins right now. I'm not that concerned about what it's actually going to look like. And we will see what ultimately happens with them. Memphis 2-3. San Antonio 1-3. I can't believe the under on San Antonio was one of the easiest bets to make because it was 34.5. I'm just shocked, honestly, that San Antonio was that high. Somebody has to lose in the West, man. It was pretty clear it was going to be Utah. They are bad. But also San Antonio, they are also really bad. They just have a really good star player in Victor Wembanyama. So we'll see what happens with them and whether they can turn it around. But I never got it at that point. Okay. Folks, I think I'm good. I think I'm done. That is going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at BetOnline. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Really appreciate the love and support on the podcast as always. Overreactions are always fun. We will hope and see what happens with the Nuggets, whether they can turn things around and continue to do so, or if some of the overreactions, especially the negative ones, kind of bear out and we figure out what ultimately happens with this Nuggets and whether they are the team that people hope they are or the team that they actually are. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit that like button on the way out. I will talk to you guys very soon.